Okay, so some sensitive topics. Okay, so as I said, it's a, this is going to be different to, something where, all right, here are 50 differential equations, and they're all the same, and we're going to do them all. Fine. It's going to be more a mixture of those sorts of things and kind of research-focused questions. So it's a little bit of, problematic. But this is a problem, right? You come out of doing all this undergrad work, and then you start to get into maybe doing research, and it turns out it's like, I don't know what to do, right? It's like, it's not all the same stuff that you just told me. So science is hard. So we're going to have a couple of major things. I know I sort of might repeat myself. So we're going to have a manifesto. This idea that complex systems is actually just where science was going to end up, right? We'll talk about these pieces. I'm going to kind of come back. I'm going to go into some work, and then maybe in the middle of the course, and then towards the end, kind of zoom out again to bigger stories about complexification, but the sort of limits of these pieces. Right, these are the three things you need together, right? You need data, theory, and experiment to kind of all match up. Some fields do this beautifully. Fluid mechanics, very mature field, amazing success there. This is a profound part of what we're going to talk about, emergence, right? So that you have many things being combined in some way, they're interacting in some way, they have their own individual properties, and then macroscopically you have properties that aren't inherent in any of them, right? And so I like to say certain things like, there's no financial collapse in a dollar bill, and there's no like love in a carbon atom or whatever, and there are various things you can go on about that, right? These are very much emergent properties. Of course, we can't help ourselves, and we anthropomorphize everything. We just can't help ourselves, right? Cats, it's okay, because they're, Okay, there's a big tension then, universality and accidents of history, right? So the platypus is some accident of history, right? But universality, this idea that we end up with planets and fluids behaving the way they do, these are universal stories, right? So honey and milk and water, all Navier-Stokes equations, right? Toggle some numbers in there, but they are, maybe it's good, I'll repeat this, but fluid mechanics to me has been this sort of an unbelievable achievement in this sort of realm of figuring out a system story, because it is a micro to macro theory, and it applies to all sorts of different phenomena, very different kinds of things, right? The Earth's mantle and core, and our blood and air. I mean, it's really unbelievable. But it's not, you can't use for everything, right? Although people have modeled the economy using fluid, really strange things people have done. But this is a big tension, right? So stuff that was always going to happen, maybe the way, language, some aspects of, say, even just language, or the way, human populations are, or the distributions of species in forests, there's this kind of potential there for things to, kind of bottleneck. They have to be like that, right? So you can't have any shaped whale, for example. If you're going to have a big thing swimming in fluids, it's not going to, have all these like sails dragging on it. So there are there's reality sort of forcing things into certain kinds of shapes, and then there are very much accidents of history. This is what we want to get to over and over again, the extent that we can, micro to macro mechanisms, right? So can we sort of write down the details of the system, they're interacting, maybe it's people interacting, or if it's, some things with spin, this sort of thing, we're trying to get a magnet out of it. Can we do that? Yeah, so lots of pieces. There's going to be scaling, the surprise of what do I call these unexpected events. Networks is a big piece in here. Robustness is a big piece. Spreading, how things spread, enormous. All right, and then, I've alluded to this a little bit. So theory of anything. So why is there complexification? Big piece is gravity, actually, but we'll get to that. Okay, just a bit about framing here, right? So complex systems is all sorts of stuff. It's been kind of sort of moving this way where people think that everything that's a complex system has to have a clear network structure in it. That's not really true, right, at all. So, and the atmosphere is a great example. That's a fantastic complex system. Great achievement. We know we can predict the weather out to maybe 2 weeks, in the future. That's the best we'll get to. We're about 7 or 8 days now. But that's an incredible achievement of human understanding. But it's not a network, right? Okay. The John Dory is the course mascot, and the explanation for that is it's a little weird. What's the John Dory is a greeting that you might use in certain parts of the world, like England or Australia. And it's a rhyming slang for what's the story. John Dory is just a fish. That's it. It has nothing to do with how you feel about the person. It's just a straight up rhyming slang thing. So there are all sorts of, there's a weird history of these things. Edward Lears, for example, would be beers. Have some Edward Lears, and then you just call them Edwards, right? So this is hematoleia, right? So it's these are cryptolex, hematoleia, which is the dropping of the piece that rhymes. So the Cockney language, you might see it in movies, right, is a fantastic, it's full of this, right? And no one knows what anyone is saying unless you're part of the team. So it's a way of getting around the power, I suppose. But there are old ones like it's cold outside, which it isn't, but it's cold as soldier's bold. Just soldier's bold. You know, this is your garden hose, meat pies, there's just all sorts of things, right? And then you just, you drop off the words that rhyme and no one knows what's going on. So what's the John Dory? Yeah, taxis, Boris Spassky's, viruses. There you go. Really silly. But it's very odd because you can't just make, I'll just say one more thing about this. I'm pushing the wrong thing. You can't just make these up. Like, you could walk in and say, just try to make some up that you've just thought of. And there's some feeling about how these things should work. People will be like, no, like you cannot use. So I don't know what that is, but there's some oddness to it. All right, so a little bit more about the topics. I know this is getting into it. Allometry, which is references scaling that is non-isometric. So isometric means that the shapes would scale, right? So if you had a series of animals of different, like mouse to an elephant, and you scaled the mouse up and it looks just like the elephant in terms of its overall dimensions, then that would be an isometric scaling. But if some part of it stretches in certain ways more than the others at a certain kind of rate, then you start to get what we call allometry, right? So we'll come back to that. Lots of things about scaling in general. There's all sorts of stuff, and I'll kind of go from physics through to social phenomena. Dimensional analysis is a very important piece in here, right? So we'll get to that. That's very nice. It's the Buckingham pi theorem, which is quite beautiful. This is a huge piece, power law size distributions or heavy-tailed distributions, so things like earthquakes, wealth, financial crashes. Not all of these things follow exactly those distributions, but it's a big deal. And it connects into these pieces that we kind of have floating around in our common language, like 80-20 rule, like 80% of the work is 20% of the time, and vice versa. And then this thing now, the 1%, which is, see, in this one, at least you've encoded some information, right? Like 80-20. This just says there's 1% and then 99%, which is true, right? It doesn't tell you anything about the 1%, really. But it's amazingly shorthanded to mean something. This is now enough to get the pitchforks out, right? But if you start to look at these distributions, you can actually do some nice stuff to figure out these pieces as well. So that's a sort of a fun calculation. Okay, Zipf's law is a big piece in here. This is a very simple thing. You've got lots of things like, say, cities, right? And you've got the number of people in the cities. You just rank them from largest to smallest, and then look at that trend. What does that look like? I'm clicking too many things. Sorry. I got used to my special thing. So yeah, order coming out of randoms, very, very hugely important thing. Randomness is very, very, it's all over the place. Mechanisms, as I said, and these are mechanisms for getting to these so-called power law distributions. And this is a really profound one, the rich get richer. And we'll really dig into that one. The rich get richer mechanism. There's new names have been discovered many times by different groups over 50 years, 60 years, 80 years maybe. But we're sort of all circled around. We kind of all have the story together. It takes a while for that to happen, but this is a profound piece. And it matters tremendously. All right, so robustness. This is enormous as well, right? So we've got all these systems around us. Most of the time they hold together, and sometimes they go kaboom, right? And we have some very clear ones and things like, forests, for example, and the forest fires in California. These are terrible things, and there's been a lot of different kind of discussion over a very, serious kind of discussion. I mean, it's huge amount of damage and lives lost that come from these things. About how to manage forests, right? And people kind of got it wrong for long periods of time. We've done the wrong thing. You know, a huge problem in Australia. Australia's either on fire or underwater in some way, and sometimes both is going on. So, so risk, you know, so maybe you have a system that's kind of balancing out risk. This, I think, is a pretty profound thing. So how do we build, say, optimal forests or other kinds of systems? And then there's a connection to a kind of another beautiful problem, which is how do you allocate facilities within a population? So populations are never really heterogeneous, right? We're always kind of like, we've got cities and we're kind of camped up on mountains and all sorts of things. So there's a real heterogeneity to that. So how do you then think about it from a planning or just from maybe you're a government, but maybe you're a corporation like Starbucks? How do you start to allocate everything? Where do you put them based on where people are? And so these are kind of flips of each other. And this is a really beautiful kind of piece of work there. Right, so it's not that so it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to help people, if you're trying to actually minimize the distance that is to, say, schools and hospitals, you do something quite different, which makes sense, to coffee shops where you're trying to help yourself by making money. Emergence more is different, so that's going to be this big piece. We'll get to that. Measurement, right? So that's a piece I'll add about mismeasurement in the sense that people tend to want to put one number on things, and that's a bad plan, right? So we'll look at that. So you don't want to do that. You see it happens all the time. Okay, complex networks will then be a big piece. There's a whole course that comes after it, but this is a pretty mature field now. In many ways, but there's still, I think, a huge future for it. Again, it was a data transition, right? Late 1990s, enough data sets came online. The web comes into existence in 92. Internet's 1969. I know those things are kind of conflated now, and we dropped the capital I. But internet is 1969, was ARPANET, and then we got to the web in 92. So by the end of the 90s, you know, people are putting things online in big ways, and data sets then opened up what we could see about networks of all sorts of things. Actors being connected through movies or power grids or whatever you want, all sorts of stuff. And it turned out that what people have been thinking about in mathematics for the last 60 years is never found in the real world, ever. You never find them. So the pure random networks, you'll never find them. But if you tweak them in the right way, which would seem pathological, then you'll find them. And it's because the real ones are made, right? They're made. There's some growth thing that makes them. And it's not just some like thing where you pull one out of your head. All right, there'll be some stuff about socio-technical systems, as I said. We'll get to stories, but a lot of stuff about spreading here, you know, really profound kind of phenomena in systems. Biological spreading, disease type spreading, and then social type spreading. These are, you know, it doesn't mean it just, it only applies to social, but what I'll call social type spreading. All right, there's other pieces, right? So you will learn how to make things spread. I can't guarantee it, but we'll learn all about fame, actually, right? And how it works, why the Mona Lisa is the Mona Lisa, and why fate doesn't exist. So that's good. All right. Okay. That's good. All right, I'm not going to show that. Okay, so the simple narrative arc, and I know I got rid of a lot of things here, right? So there's going to be the overview, this thread of understanding socio-technical systems will kind of go through it because so much of what we do is really people is involved in some way. Allometric scaling, huge piece. Size distributions, right? We have some big system and we just count up how big are the pieces. Could be cities, could be wealth of individuals, whatever you like. You know, number of species in a forest, number of times words appear in language, lots of size distributions in the world. And this is not even thinking about how they're interacting with each other. So parallel size distributions or heavy tail distributions, and then we want to get to these mechanisms. Robustness, as I said, this is just one page for the whole thing. Complex networks, so it's going to be structure, growth mechanisms, how do we get these networks? We were stuck on this for a long time to figure this out. And then how things spread on networks, and then complexification. All right, okay, that's good. All right, there are tarot cards, and I'll have to work on this thing, but these all apply to one of these little, you know, it helps me organize the themes, and it's just really silly. But yeah, I have to print them out. They have little jokes in them. There may be Monty Python references and Borges and stuff like that. Okay, so the idea for projects, this is good. Try to develop the proposal. I want to push this forward. It always takes too long from my point. I'm too slow to get it going. So we'll try to get that happening in the first few weeks. We do have we have a TA type character for this course, which is David Dewhurst. Some of you, if you're in my group, you might know. So he's a PhD student now in complex systems and data science. So he's available for questions and all sorts of things. All right, but we'll talk about that later on. When we talk about office hours, which I haven't figured out, right? So it can be completely novel research where you're doing something crazy, you've got some data set, whatever it is. That's totally great. Love for things to explode. Or it could be something that's quite well established, right? So I'll give you some papers. So if you're an undergrad, you might want to focus on that, right? You don't have to. And then we'll have a couple of talks and a written piece, I think, right? If you want to use the VAC, right, the advanced computing core that we have here, then that's completely encouraged, right? So we can set you up with that. There's a nice big $1 million just came in to help this piece with GPUs, so that should be very good. We do have some large data sets on there. We have tons of books, for example. We have Twitter. We have 10% of all tweets going back to 2008. We wrote to them when there were 4 people working there and said, this looks interesting. And they said, yeah, we have a little feed for you. So that's stayed on. So we've done lots of things with that. So you can work with Twitter if you want. Yes, right. Academic output, big piece. Okay. Yeah, I'll talk about this later on, I suppose. But this is the first talks. This is just to say the first talks will be very quick, right? So maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes, depending on the numbers. If you've been to conferences, maybe you've seen something like that. There are some 30-second talks, right, where everyone's just lined up and the things are all in the feed, and it's just, yeah, pretty stressful. But you know, I go on about this a fair bit. You need to be able to talk at all scales about what you're doing, and this is not just to sell it. This is actually a knowledge thing. This is really about knowledge. Can you get all of this together? Marikov, who I mentioned before, who gave me that book years ago, when he was doing rounds as a medical student, because in Australia you go straight from high school into medicine, right? You're 18 and you're like starting to, cut people up. Very trusting, right? They kept the person in charge kept asking, "What is medicine? What is medicine?" Eventually, they boiled it down to pattern recognition, which was interesting. I don't know. People might have different things, but I think there is this scaffolding. Not everything works, right? So some stuff. This is usually where graduate students exist, right? They can't quite tell you in a quick way, right? So Thanksgiving turns into, what are you working on? And 3 hours later, right? But part of understanding things is getting back out here, yeah. And it's not just make it kind of silly or fun. It's actually really deep explanation. So, and then this is to sort of indicate, right, there's some stuff that's this is just not connected, right? And definitely marketing and propaganda and all sorts of stuff have some weird broken hierarchies.